I personally find her camp, funny, fairly down to earth, by the fact she has, 2 homes that I don't, which she could fix possibly if she gets a move.
If you're watching,
Angela.
Who is the most dynamic figure in this Labour government? For many Tories, it's Angela Rayner. Joining me now to discuss this is Christian Calgie of the Daily Express. Calgie, I think it's been a summer dominated by Nigel Farage, but now we've seen the re-emergence of a familiar political figure, one of our favourites, Angela Rayner, on the front of the Daily Telegraph. Tell us more about this story.
Well, this emerged at the weekend that she has bought a second home. She already owns a £650,000 one in her Greater Manchester constituency. She's now bought an £800,000 penthouse luxury seaside fronting flat in Brighton. And of course, she has a residence of Horse Guards Parade, a Grace in Favour pad in central London. But I think this is a story because obviously amid Rachel Reeves's attempts to try and find taxes to raise, Labour have already been pretty hardline on second homeowners, not just taxing them but overtly criticising wealthy homeowners. And the Telegraph now believe that by being slightly clever with what she claims as her primary residence, she may have avoided tens of thousands of pounds in tax when buying this new property.
Absolutely. I think it was one of Reeves' predecessors, James Heale, who said that the difference between tax evasion and tax avoidance was the thickness of a prison wall cell. And it looks in the Telegraph in this story are very keen to emphasise she hasn't broken the law, but there are two things as I see it, as you agree. First of all is the issue of hypocrisy, because you think about how much Labour went after Rishi Sunak on tax and his wife, the non-dom status, a perfectly legal arrangement. And the second interesting thing is about electoral law and about her potentially being registered at 3 different addresses, which are obviously, as you say, the one in Greater Manchester, the new flat in Hove, and that Grace in Favour one. How do you see all this panning out?
Well, there's always the question to about cut through, and people are still trickling back from their summer holidays and thinking about putting the kids back into school. So the Tories have an issue trying to fight that uphill struggle. But the issue is one of substance. It's not just the interesting gossip of what's she going to decorate the flat like. We all want to know that.
Sorry, Boris. Yeah.
But so she does have questions to answer, and I'm sure when Parliament comes back, and more importantly, when we journalists go back to our daily number 10 briefings, that we will start getting a better grip of this story. There are calls for her to actually lose her voting registration as a result of the confusion surrounding this. I think she needs to put it right. And, actually one of the issues I've had with this Labour administration is that they are so personally offended when you accuse them of an impropriety of this nature. I've had arguments with special advisors where I've gone to them for comment on a story, and they've gone, this, for example, to do with the freebies that have been enjoyed by Keir Starmer's wife. And number 10 have gone, well, this has got nothing, she's not a political figure, she's not frontline politics. And I've just sent back, reams of examples of them attacking Mrs. Sunak when she was in Downing Street. And unfortunately, Labour have this incredibly thin skin, and they still don't quite seem to realise that actually standards are substantially higher when you're in government. And you rode in on this pledge to clean up politics, but I've not seen any example of it remotely yet.
I think it's really interesting. We're talking about the summer and how it's all gone. And one of the reasons why Reform, I think, are doing very well at the moment is because their willingness to kind of play the media game, putting on things, kind of feeding the beast of the media, and doing so in a way of content creation. It's a really interesting idea about sort of internet production, actually having things that'll go viral, which tweets will bang in sort of parlance, and having, for instance, the deportation press conference, that board, versus the kind of number 10 style of, well, we'll stick to the rigid grid and this is what you will write about. And it's a very different way of approaching things. And I do agree about that point about sort of that obvious, understandable defensiveness when it comes to certain people. But as you say, the fact is, I think too often, and this tends to be a thing with the left, people think it's about good people versus bad people.
Yeah.
Actually, it's about systems and incentives. And that's probably part of the reason, as a whole, if you step back, why this government is struggling is because they've come in thinking, we'll get rid of the guys with the blue rosettes, put the red rosettes in, and it's much more difficult.
Yeah, and they think that that's been a substantial change, whereas the voters haven't seen a difference, and that's why Reform's doing so well. But I think the government's communication strategy as a whole has been hopeless. Part of that is to do with you have to take your lead from the top, and you can't force your party leader to be someone they're not. We saw it. I mean, I remember quite vividly with, towards the 2015 election, where they were saying, actually, just let Ed Miliband be a nerd and whatever. Stop trying to shape him in a way. Starmer is too civil servant coded, too loyally, too boring to try and pretend he's anything else. And that's where Farage succeeds so well, that it feels completely natural when he stands in front of the biggest Union Jack we've seen probably as a political prop ever, and a departure board. Can you imagine Keir Starmer trying to do that? I don't think you could, and I think it would come across completely inauthentically. And a lot of people in Westminster, journalists occasionally, but I think also spin doctors, people in Whitehall, they do not give the public enough credit for being as clever as they are. It's not an intellectual intelligence. It's a guttural intelligence, and they can sniff the truth, and they know when something's up, and you've got to work with that, and that's where Labour's going to struggle. Frankly, I think until they pick a new leader.
Yeah, I think the other thing, of course, about Keir Starmer is that he's now had a year and a month or so in government, and he's made a number of key decisions. One of which was the cabinet secretary choice at the end of the year. Who are you going to go for? And he chooses the longest-serving permanent secretary, a man who's not just father but grandfather with civil servants as well.
Yeah.
The sort of, I don't know if they have sort of nepo babies in the civil service, sort of nepo Sir Humphrey.
Definitely do.
But Chris Wormald was chosen. Might be a very great chap, but now there's complaints and briefings about him being sort of too much of the system, not actually appreciating the need for radicalism.
Quelle surprise.
Who could have seen that coming? And this is what is so striking, is I think you can see so many of the tenets of Whitehall coming down the last 5 years or so, and it just seems Labour didn't do much kind of system thinking on that.
No, they didn't. But it goes back to your point about how Labour perceived so many of the problems to be born of not just Tory incompetence, but Tory malice. And it wasn't. And they would have been far better to take the warnings of both serving Tory ministers, but also people like Dominic Cummings much more seriously. And you're starting to see an increasing, it's already not just a trickle, it's already a stream of briefings from advisors to the media about how Cummings was right, Whitehall is broken, the incentives are all wrong, what the government is actually in control of is minuscule in comparison to what the public may think they're in control of, but that's not an excuse, because the public will rightly say, we'll take back control, close down the quangos. They already have with one, they did with NHS England. But the pace of change has not been actually, I think, a lack of desire, but Whitehall is like trudging through sludge. We saw an announcement, I think it was yesterday, from the Cabinet Office that this parliamentary session is now going to go on until well into 2026 because getting legislation through has taken so long. And that is a symptom, not a cause of Labour's problems.
We're also going to see a lot of big bills coming into the House of Lords in the next couple of weeks. We've obviously got the assisted dying one, which potentially has knock-on ramifications. Other pieces of legislation as well. I think the employment rights bill is one of those. There's the border bill and the education bill as well. I mean, we're going to be in for a sort of long session because they're going to try and get as much of this through as possible. But as you say, Christian, it's not just about sort of changing the law. It's also about kind of getting the sort of manoeuvres and levers and shakes.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of concerns that the Lords is going to be really difficult, not just because Labour doesn't have a majority there, but because the Lords is much more detailed orientated than the Commons. And I think one of the things that I have been utterly depressed by is the terrible quality of MPs. The quality of legislation that is coming out of the Commons is now so poor. The Lords are becoming increasingly older. They're being asked to do very long, late sittings to try and, get at the niggles out of this legislation, not make it perfect, just try and get it workable. And so that's why actually I think certain things that we've heard about, particularly one of the pieces of legislation that I've been focusing on a lot over the last year, which is the vapes and tobacco bill, they're having to take a step back because, I mean, assisted dying wasn't even in Labour's manifesto. It's taken up so much political oxygen, and it's not going to slow down anytime soon.
And there's a real irritation from some peers who have this rather complacent sense from campaigners. Oh, the Lords can tidy it up. Well, it's not really. I mean, it's not really what it should be. If you're not thinking the assisted dying bill is safe, it shouldn't pass, into the second chamber. To go back to Angela Rayner, I mean, she's got some big bills on her desk. She's got, obviously, planning, got that 1.5 million new homes target in this parliament. She's also got things like local government reform, all those different mayoral elections as well. I think it's really interesting because she's got such a sort of wide-ranging brief, a bit like Preza in a skirt, as she herself has said, apparently. All roads lead to her, and she could be the figure. Obviously you've got employment rights as well. The unions love that.
Yeah.
She could be the figure who makes or breaks this government, as well as Rachel Reeves.
Yeah, absolutely. And the key thing about Rayner, unlike Reeves, is that she is slightly separate from the Starmer project. Yeah. She's had to be...
Yes, her own identity.
She's got her own identity, not just because of her political background, the fact she was much closer to Corbyn and the unions. She's got her own mandate from the Labour Party. But you can imagine Starmer, a Starmer government without Rayner can exist. A Starmer government without Reeves, it's the quasi-Truss problem. They are the same project. They cannot, live while the other survives, or something like Harry Potter. But Rayner is a much more interesting character. I personally think the Tories in particular have badly misjudged how unpopular Rayner isn't. I think the Tories have often tried focusing on Rayner, and I think she is much more of a catch for Labour than most other ministers. I personally find her camp, funny, fairly down to earth, by the fact she has, 2 homes that I don't, which she could fix possibly if she gets a move.
If you're watching,
Angela, I like the fact that she drinks and she's vaping in a dinghy on holiday. I find that endearing. I think most, especially young people, but a lot of ordinary people would also find that endearing, and that's what makes her so much of a threat, I think, to Starmer, more so than any other minister in government.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think that you look at the polling, for instance, I think the top of Labour lists polling for who would be the most popular next choice would be Andy Burnham. But of course, he's not going anywhere until 2028. No, not happening, no. I think you were at the lobby reception drinks in 22 when, Keir Starmer just went a whole bunch of jokes about Andy Burnham in the World Cup and saying that first he was Argentina, then they got now then he was Germany, they got knocked out, then he was France, and all of those. I mean, there's a bit of tension
I think I possibly switched off by that point. Starmer's after dinner speeches don't grip me quite as much as...
Maybe not for after bed dinner, but pre-bedtime.
Pre-bedtime speeches.
But, I mean, up after Burnham, Rayner is the most popular choice. And I think that, she has got that kind of... It's always said of the Tories, right? You run slightly to the right of the current leader to win. So Liz Truss against Boris. And same with the left. You run slightly to the left. Brown did this after Blair. And she is perfectly well placed. And... one of the things when I did the Trust book was she had all these trade meetings, these trade envoys. All these Labour MPs with their union connections want to come and meet her. So she's a lot of FaceTime, different areas, because MCHLG is a massive brief. Yeah. And so she can talk about different things. She will be well placed. Although, as one person on the right of the party said, that the fact that she would be the obvious choice to succeed Starmer makes us think that Starmer's going nowhere because we don't want her to come back.
Quite. But also, the other person that's... is Wes Streeting, who is much more of a Westminster figure than Rayner, insofar as he seems to be overinflated. I'm not going to make comparisons to Kemi, even though I could. And also he is far more vulnerable in terms of his seat to the Gaza Independents. He is much more to the right of the other candidates. So, I personally, and it's one of those things that occasionally I'll say, Angela Rayner, slay queen. And my followers, who are by and large pretty right-wing, rabid people, they hate me for it. But I think anyone who's a bit of a laugh, I think Tories like her. Do you remember that utterly bizarre moment where Sir Jake Berry, the former Tory party chairman, revealed that he had a poster of Angela Rayner on his office wall because he thought she was sexy? Something his wife was clued in on, by the way. It's so Tory.
There is a Tory to Rayner thing, isn't there?
So is.
It's really quite funny to know. And I thought it was interesting, a few months ago, we had a press conference, asked Nigel Farage, said, you've attacked Ned Miliband, you've attacked Keir Starmer. Yeah. What about Angela Rayner? She went, well, at least he's normal.
She is normal. She is normal. She's down to earth. And also, I mean, that's slightly tangential, but I was so pleased to not hear a politician doing holier than thou for the sake of it.
This week?
For this week, where he sort of actually called the Tories out for taking pops at Rayner for living in the Whitehall Grace and Favour flat. Admiralty House, which actually previously was lived in by your esteemed editor.
Indeed,
yes. The Tories, and Farage quite rightly pointed out, the Tories didn't have a problem with it then.
Yeah.
So I thought that was quite good, because you avoid falling into these pitfalls of and it's exactly what Labour did, by the way. When we talked at the start of this recording about Angela Rayner's council tax and all the rest, you can avoid that. The biggest issue is often hypocrisy rather than the crime itself. So I think it's thank goodness Nigel's trying to avoid falling into that.
So this is the final question then, Christian. We are going to be entering conference season very shortly. Yeah. We've got the sort of...
brace.
brace, yeah. Pantomime politics of reform next week. I understand Jeremy Carl's going to be there with a microphone running around going, what do you think of this sort of thing? Let's hope he doesn't get the lie detector out. And then a few weeks time after that, Labour conference. What are you going to be looking for when it comes to that?
Well, I think Labour conference is going to be really difficult for them. I wouldn't be surprised if it gets completely derailed by Gaza. Really? I think that is going to be enormous, especially being hosted in Liverpool. I think that's a real issue. The other thing to watch out for, especially on the outside of the secure zone, is the fury at the lack of progress about the Hillsborough law, which Labour Liverpool MPs have been vocally furious about Keir Starmer breaking his pledges over the passing of that, which would hold the authorities much more accountable when there's a cover-up after a disaster like Hillsborough. So those sort of things, I think, have the potential to set alight and spark a fire that the Labour administration really don't want. The question is, can they tell a narrative story about what they've achieved in the first year? Or are they just going to continue doing this thing, which I think is disastrous for them, which is playing on reform's turf, on things like immigration and crime, because they can't out-Farage.
Indeed. And you think about last year, it was utterly miserable in Liverpool when we had Sue Gray back to be fired after less than 100 days. And almost 12 months on, the polling is down and things are even worse.
It is. The only respite for Labour is that the Tories are afterwards, which actually I think is going to be much, much worse.
As the famous song goes, anything you can do, we can do better. Or worse in this case. Yeah. Thank you, Christian, and thank you for watching us on Spectator TV today.